Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show on this Sunday evening, May 1st, 2022. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan coming to you from the National Weather Service on behalf of a unique partnership with Alaska Public Media. And if you'd like additional weather information, if you have an interesting report to pass along to me or a photo, you can reach me at peter.chan@noaa.gov. And for additional weather information on top of what I provide, you can go to weather.gov online. It'll bring you to a point-and-click map of the continental U.S. with Alaska and Hawaii to the lower left. And you'll be able to get forecast, watches, warnings, advisory information for anywhere in the country. Check up on family and friends. On this Sunday afternoon, we see widespread red flag warnings across the southwest part of the country, from southern Nevada through much of Arizona, New Mexico. Severe thunderstorm and tornado watches cover from the Texas, Oklahoma panhandles down through eastern portions of New Mexico. Also some severe weather, a severe thunderstorm watch, southern Virginia down into North Carolina, and a few warnings that way as well. Well, across Alaska, significant snowmelt continues throughout the interior. We've seen temperatures up along the Yukon Valley, especially the middle and upper Yukon Valley, in the 50s to even around 60 degrees since late last week. Rivers are reported rising by the Fairbanks Forecast Office. As breakup approaches, we have yet, though, for things to really begin to move and start shifting downstream. But be safe and proactive. If you have things down along the river, vehicle, other property, move it if you can before the rivers continue to rise and that ice breaks up. Also, we're going to see some windy conditions there along the northern Gulf, particularly the Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, along with some wet conditions. Kodiak picked up over 2¼ inches of rainfall yesterday into early this morning, and some heavier rain will move up there, especially around Portage Glacier as we go into the day on Monday. And daylight continues to lengthen across the state, so pretty much the aurora viewing season is over with. Looking at a couple of the FAA webcams way off there in the west near the Bering Strait, Wales. Lower cloud heights and falling temperatures into the teens. A cold front has swung through there, picking up some brisk northerly winds. And then down south central areas along the northern Gulf Coast, Portage Glacier, wind and rain there a bit more in the interior. Temperature at 39 degrees, and the winds have been gusting out of the southeast as high as 40 knots. They'll be picking up further, along with more of a steadier rain developing overnight, especially on Monday. Well, a quick check here. Yesterday, Saturday, was new moon on April 30th, and pretty much the aurora viewing season is over with, simply because we're just getting too much light here now that we're seeing the length of daylight continuing to grow toward the summer solstice. But we'll have a chance of seeing them again once we get into the latter half of August, as we start to regain the darker night sky. And also coming up mid-month in a couple of weeks, the full flower moon of May, and there will also coincide with a total lunar eclipse, so mark that down on your calendar. I'll be talking more about that as that time approaches. Looking at satellite imagery, we can see the comet curl in the clouds there around Kodiak. That's that area of low pressure. One frontal system is pushed to near along the Panhandle coast, and it's bringing areas of rain or rain showers, little breezier conditions. Even some of that moisture has made it up into the interior. There is colder air across the northwest portion of the state down into the Seward Peninsula, bringing with it some lower cloudiness and a little bit of light snow or flurries. Further south and west, there is another low working its way through the central Aleutians. That feature will be riding up along the North Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula early in this week. So today, there's that low right over Kodiak Island, with an occluded front arcing out ahead of it that's going to bump up there into the Panhandle coast soon. Trough across the Alaska range, a few intermittent, very light showers in the interior, but nothing too heavy. And then that other low that's out there in the central Aleutians will begin to ride up along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula late tonight and into the day on Monday. Meanwhile, a pocket of colder air will continue to just kind of settle in down along the west side of the state from the lower Chukchi through the Bering Strait toward St. Lawrence Island. So you're going to see definitely colder temperatures settle in there as we go through the early week way in the west. By Tuesday, the low pressure will be just southeast of Kodiak Island, the southwestern Gulf, and the occluded front will arc all the way along the length of the Gulf Coast, extending up to about the inner channels there of the Panhandle, bringing rain along the coast and still some snow in the higher elevations there of the coastal mountains. And when we take a look at temperatures, with the push of cloud cover in the rain, temperatures are going to stay above freezing there across much of the region, with the exception of maybe the interior up toward Glen Allen and the Copper River Basin, near freezing. Same thing at McGrath. Everybody else, though, 30s to near 40 degrees, especially there in through the Panhandle. Temperatures Monday afternoon will be kept down in the upper 40s to low 50s at best there in the Panhandle. A little cooler across southwestern areas, the Kenai Peninsula, just due to cloud cover and rain. 40s at best, maybe eking out 50 from, say, Anchorage north up toward Talkeetna. Tuesday morning, again, temperatures along the Gulf Coast will remain above freezing in the mid-30s for lows and mid-30s to around 40 degrees in through the Panhandle. As we go into Tuesday afternoon, we expect temperatures mainly along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle in the 40s for highs. But areas of the south central interior, if you get a smidgen of sun, you'll be up above 50 degrees, especially as you get up toward Talkeetna, the south side of the Alaska Range, where there may be some breaks. Further north, colder temperatures there along the northwest Arctic coast, single digits just above zero for Monday morning. Generally around or just above freezing there through the Yukon Valley, but notice there in the west, Wales down to 14, colder air spilling in across the Seward Peninsula. Still Monday afternoon, look for temperatures in the 50s along and south of the Yukon River there between the Alaska Range. Could even still be an isolated 60-degree reading. Otherwise, teens there along the western portion of the North Slope and Northwest Coast down into the west side of the Seward Peninsula. Tuesday morning lows will be down into the single digits again across areas of the North Slope and Arctic coast, especially up there toward Utqiagvik. And then down through the Yukon Valley, temperatures may cool a few degrees, just near or a bit below freezing. And temperatures, though, on Tuesday afternoon, especially just north of the Alaska Range, the central and east central interior toward the Alcan border, still look for 50s and 60s to facilitate more of that snow melt, causing the rivers to rise further and perhaps triggering the initial breakup there of the rivers in the week ahead. So keep an eye on things there. And then Monday morning, we're looking for lows 30s there across the interior southwest, back up below mid-50s up the Yukon and Kuskokwim basins, generally above freezing with the exception of the west there, Imanak down toward say Hooper Bay, near or a little below freezing, and then temperatures 40s except for on the far southwestern coast, the lower Yukon Delta in the 30s. And taking a look at the temperature outlook, May 7th through the 11th, and essentially up through the middle of the month now, it's going to cool down across the state with the likelihood of below normal temperatures, the central southern areas, especially the Panhandle. And then the precipitation outlook for May 7th through the 11th and beyond up through the 15th. A little above normal precipitation, east central areas along the Alcan border perhaps, and a little below normal along the southwest coast into the tip of the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving along now to your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned Monday or on Tuesday, we'll see widespread IFR conditions along areas of the west coast, Norton Sound, down through the lower Yukon Delta, as well as toward Bristol Bay, across the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, on up through areas of the northern Gulf Coast into the Panhandle, as well as along areas of the central Brooks Range and Arctic coast. We will continue to see IFR conditions there in the far north, eastern Brooks Range, eastern North Slope, eastern Arctic coast, and then area of expansive IFR conditions across the Gulf, Yakutat, westward through Prince William Sound, east side of the Kenai, down across Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, back out into the southeastern portion of the Bering Sea. And for Tuesday morning, a continuation of IFR conditions there along the Brooks Range, especially the south side north of the Yukon River on up toward Kaktovik, and then also widespread IFR conditions throughout the Panhandle early Tuesday. Gulf Coast back across the Alaska Peninsula into the eastern Aleutians. And yet on Tuesday afternoon, we see IFR conditions holding there across and actually expanding there through the North Slope, Arctic coast, and south of the Brooks Range. And then a broad area of IFR conditions will continue throughout the Gulf region. Looking at pass conditions, Anaktuvik Pass there in the north through the Brooks Range will be IFR throughout Monday, as will Adigan Pass. Further south and west, Lake Clark and Merrill, we'll see marginal visual flight rules there during the day on Monday. Rainy Pass, MVFR as well. Also, MVFR conditions to start the morning there, Windy Pass becoming VFR. And as we go east, Isabel will see MVFR conditions becoming VFR as well, and so will Mentasta Pass going from MVFR early in the day to VFR. Further south across the Copper River Basin, MVFR conditions at Tanita Pass, and then further southward along the Gulf Coast, especially the east entrance of Portage Pass, including Prince William Sound. IFR conditions will hold there throughout the day Monday. On the west side, west entrance, Portage Pass, will see a pocket of VFR conditions. And then across the Panhandle, the north end there at Chilkoot and White, we'll see IFR conditions give way to MVFR conditions later Monday morning and afternoon, though a trend toward IFR will be widespread across the Panhandle, especially by Tuesday. Looking at freezing levels, surface freezing line, Monday morning runs from the inner canals there, inner channels there of the Panhandle across the northern Gulf, and then kind of coming up around the Alaska Range up through the Yukon Valley and then back out into the central Bering Sea. Freezing levels aloft do rise upwards to 4,000 feet along the Alcan border in the vicinity of the Yukon Flats. Generally, freezing levels are above 2,000 feet across much of the mainland. And then the greatest threat for icing will be associated with low pressure and a feed of moisture that's coming in off the Gulf there from Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, entrance to Cook Inlet, east side of Kodiak Island between 5,000 and 13,000 feet. And back out through the central eastern Aleutians, some isolated moderate icing, 6,000 to 16,000 feet. As far as jet stream level winds, we have a couple of low circulations, one up there in the northwest, the other toward Bristol Bay, and then just a broad area of winds upwards of 80 to as high as 135 knots there, generally on the east side of the Gulf into the North Pacific, west of British Columbia. And at 9,000 feet, we see a low pressure circulation there over just west of Kodiak Island over the Alaska Peninsula, with a broad belt of winds coming in up from the south and southeast at as high as 40 to 50 knots along the Gulf Coast and outer northern portion of the Panhandle. Also another low circulation there in the lower Chukchi Sea. When we drop down to 3,000 feet, some winds there along the west coast, Seward Peninsula, down toward St. Lawrence and St. Matthew, 40-knot north-northeast winds. Low pressure circulation continues there between Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula, with stronger winds to 65 knots coming in there to Prince William Sound. As a result, we expect isolated severe turbulence portions of the north central and northwestern Gulf along the Kenai and Prince William Sound, along with some low-level wind shear, and other pockets of moderate turbulence there in the northwest, St. Lawrence Island, and the Aleutians, surface to 3,000 feet.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the earth and grows our food. While the sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the sun doesn't stay at the sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system is going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Well, I'll bring home the show with the marine weather tonight, and looking at the sea ice edge, we continue to have the melting occurring there throughout the central northern Bering, essentially ice-free south of St. Matthew and south and southwest of Nunavik Island. Still some shore-fast ice there along coastal areas of the southwest and on up into Norton Sound and around areas of St. Lawrence Island. As we go further north, we see along the Arctic coast still the ice in place, but we do have more of a northerly wind flow through the lower Chukchi Sea on through the Bering Strait. Some stronger winds upwards to 30 knots could cause the ice to shift around there a bit, especially from the strait southward into the far north end of the Bering on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. In through the Panhandle, Monday will be a breezy day, 20-knot winds with gusts to 35 knots. Inner channels there around Petersburg, waves of 3-4 feet. Outer coastal areas off the Panhandle, 35 to 40-knot gales, especially as you round out north and west of Sitka on up toward Yakutat and further up through the north central Gulf. And then Tuesday, winds could be to 40 knots there, Dixon entrance, with waves upwards to 15 feet. Gusts to 40 knots possible even up towards Petersburg. Southeasterly winds 50 knots, Lynn Canal waves a few feet. And then the outer coast, 30 to 35 knot winds extending from Craig all the way out toward and west of Yakutat, with waves building from 17 to 18 feet there off the southern portion of the Panhandle coast to in excess of 20 feet, especially west there of Gustavus in the open waters of the Gulf. On Monday, strongest winds will be coming in there toward the east side of Prince William Sound, 50-knot storm force winds, 40-knot winds off the Kenai with waves of 14 to 16 feet. Easterly winds to 30 knots, Prince William Sound waves 9 feet, and northeasterly winds 30 to 35 knots down the length of Cook Inlet with waves as high as 9 to 12 feet through lower Cook Inlet. Tuesday, winds will generally be 20 knots out of the east there, Prince William Sound waves 4 feet. Northeast winds 20 to 25 knots down the length of Cook Inlet with waves as high as 8-9 feet there at the entrance. And then easterly winds off the Kenai at 20 knots with waves to 12 feet. Low pressure circulation will be in the vicinity of Kodiak Island on Monday. South winds ahead of it, turning easterly there through Shelikof Strait around 25 knots. On the backside, Look for 25-knot north and northwest winds across the tip there of the Alaska Peninsula. And then on Tuesday, we see another low circulation there just southeast of Kodiak Island, 20-knot northeasterly winds through Shelikof Strait, waves 5 feet. But generally speaking, we're looking at northwesterly winds across the Alaska Peninsula, increasing to 25 to 30 knots as you get down toward Cold Bay, False Pass, and Sand Point, with waves running 11 to 13 feet. Across the Aleutian chain on Monday, winds will generally be out of the northwest at 25 to 30 knots, waves 15 to 18 feet on the North Pacific side and 9 to 12 feet on the Bering side. For Tuesday, still winds holding up out of the northwest, 25 to as high as 30 knots there through the central and eastern Aleutians, but falling off to variable winds only around 10 knots there, Kiska westward to Shimia. And looking at the southwestern coast, especially the west or eastern side of the Bering Sea, north winds 30 knots south of St. Lawrence Island through St. Matthew and St. Paul, with waves as much as 8 to 10 feet there in the open waters south of St. Matthew. And then on Tuesday, look for north to northwest winds, generally 20 to 25 knots. And in ice-free areas, waves generally running 6 to as high as 9 feet in the vicinity of St. Paul and St. George. Along the Arctic coast, northwesterly winds 5 to 10 knots. They turn more northerly once you get south of Cape Lisburne, down through the Bering Strait, and accelerating to 30 knots. That could cause the ice to shift around there through the Bering Strait, lower Chukchi Sea, and on the north side of St. Lawrence Island. And then for Tuesday, winds southwesterly, Prudhoe Bay to Kaktovik, and then out toward the west, winds turn more northwesterly around 20 knots. And the ice still there in place, though some shifting likely. Low pressure overnight early on Monday, passing along the south side of the Alaska Peninsula on up to just southwest of Kodiak Island, and then southeast of Kodiak Island on Tuesday, bringing another frontal system along the Gulf Coast and Panhandle with wind and rain. A few light showers possible there through the interior up along the Yukon Valley, colder air in the west.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.